The day Sarah Mitchell drove up to the abandoned Pearson property with her 2 young children and a U-Haul full of city belongings, every farmer in Ridgeway Valley shook their head in disbelief. In a community where family names on mailboxes had remained unchanged for generations, and respect was earned through decades of successful harvests, this city woman clearly didn't understand what she was getting into. What these lifelong farmers couldn't possibly know was that their biggest mistake wasn't doubting her commitment. It would be underestimating what she was capable of. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rolling hills of Ridgeway Valley stretched out like a patchwork quilt beneath the late March sky. Neat rows of emerging crops lined the fertile fields of the established farms, while weathered barns and well-maintained equipment spoke of generations of agricultural knowledge passed down from father to son. This was serious farming country, where success was measured in bushels per acre, and families had weathered everything from the Dust Bowl to the farm crisis of the 1980s. The annual planting festival at the Ridgeway Community Center was in full swing. Checkered tablecloths covered long tables laden with homemade dishes, Eliza Weber's famous apple pie, Dorothy Simmons' buttermilk biscuits, and Martha Donovan's prize-winning potato salad. Farmers in worn caps and their wives in practical dresses mingled beneath banners announcing this year's crop predictions and equipment demonstrations. Frank Donovan, whose corn had won the county fair blue ribbon 11 years running, held court near the punch bowl. At 62, his leathered face and calloused hands bore testimony to a lifetime working the land. His John Deere cap, faded from years in the sun, was as much a part of his identity as his surname. "Jenkins says the Peterson place finally sold," he remarked to the group gathered around him, after sitting empty for 3 years. "About time," nodded Harold Weber, whose family owned the largest dairy operation in the county. His grandfather had started with just 4 cows in 1932, and now the Weber dairy supplied milk to 3 counties. Good land going to waste like that was a shame. Who bought it? Before Frank could answer, Bill Thompson, who ran the local feed store that his father had opened in 1958, joined the conversation. The Thompson Feed and Supply had been the gathering spot for local agricultural news for decades. "Some woman from the city," he said, lowering his voice as though sharing sensitive information, "came in yesterday asking about organic seed suppliers. Had no idea what growing zone we're in. Wearing designer jeans that had never seen a day of real work." A ripple of disbelief spread through the group. The Peterson farm had been failing for years before Old Man Peterson passed away, leaving behind overgrown fields, dilapidated outbuildings, and equipment that belonged in a museum rather than a working farm. The county's agricultural extension office had tried to find a serious buyer, preferably a family with farming experience, but 175 acres was too small for the big operations and too large for most newcomers to handle. "City woman?" Frank's wife. Martha raised an eyebrow, adjusting her gingham dress that she'd made herself, as she had every dress she'd worn for the past 40 years. "What's she planning to grow?" "Window boxes of herbs. Heard she was some kind of corporate executive in Chicago," added Diane Collins, who ran the local diner where farmers gathered each morning before dawn. "Lost her job in that tech company collapse last year. Apparently, she inherited some money and decided farming would be a simpler life." Diane made air quotes with her fingers, triggering knowing looks among the group. "Simpler?" snorted Harold. "She'll be running back to the city by mid-June when she realizes farming isn't like those reality TV shows." "Did you see what she paid for the place?" asked Tom Jenkins, the real estate agent who had handled the sale. "Barely half what it was worth, even in that condition. Peterson's kids just wanted to be done with it." "She's got 2 young children with her," Bill added. "No husband in sight. How's a single mother with no experience supposed to run a farm that even Peterson couldn't keep afloat with 50 years of know-how? Frank shook his head. That land needs at least $60,000 in equipment investment just to get started. The irrigation system's shot, and the soil's been neglected for years. Peterson used to be one of the best wheat farmers in the county before his arthritis got bad. Well, I give her till the first drought or early frost, Martha declared, with the confidence of someone who had seen many city folks come and go over the years. Remember those hippies who tried to start that commune farm back in '98, left after one growing season? The laughter that followed was interrupted by the community center doors swinging open, admitting a gust of spring air, and the last person any of them expected to see at a gathering of serious farmers. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway, searching the room with determined green eyes. At 35, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced challenges before and wasn't easily deterred. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and while her clothes were clearly new, dark jeans, a flannel shirt, and work boots that hadn't yet been broken in, there was nothing frivolous about her appearance. Beside her stood 2 children, a girl around 10 with her mother's auburn hair and sharp eyes, clutching a notebook, and a boy about 7, wide-eyed, but standing tall beside his sister. The 3 of them paused, taking in the room full of strangers who had suddenly gone quiet at their entrance. Frank and Martha exchanged glances. Harold Weber cleared his throat. Bill Thompson fidgeted with his punch cup. Sarah took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked directly toward the group of farmers who had just been discussing her imminent failure. "Good afternoon," Sarah said as she approached the group, her voice carrying a hint of the city in its crisp enunciation, but lacking any pretension. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, the new owner of the Peterson place." She extended her hand to Frank, who seemed to be the center of the group. "And you are?" Frank hesitated only briefly before shaking her hand. His calloused palm dwarfed her smaller one, but her grip was firm and direct. "Frank Donovan. My family's farm borders yours to the west." Sarah nodded. "The cornfields. I saw your tractor out yesterday. Beautiful land you have." Something flickered in Frank's expression. Surprise that she had already been observing the neighboring farms, perhaps. "This is my wife, Martha," he said, gesturing to the woman beside him. "Nice to meet you," Martha said, her tone polite but reserved. Her eyes traveled to the children standing slightly behind Sarah. "And these are your little ones?" Sarah rested a hand on each child's shoulder. "This is Emma, my daughter, and this is Josh. Kids, these are our neighbors, the Donovans." Emma stepped forward with the self-possession of a child who had been taught to speak to adults as equals. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Donovan. Do you know where I might find information about the soil composition in this area? Mom says we need to test our fields before deciding what to plant." The unexpected question from a 10-year-old momentarily silenced the group. It was Bill Thompson who recovered first, his expression a mixture of amusement and condescension. "Young lady, farming is a bit more complicated than looking up soil types in a book," he said. "That Peterson place hasn't produced a decent crop in years. Your mother's bought herself quite the project." Rather than looking embarrassed, Emma consulted the small notebook she carried. "We know the USDA soil survey from 5 years ago showed increasing acidification, probably from the continuous wheat cultivation without proper crop rotation. But that can be addressed with the right amendments and management practices." Bill's mouth opened and closed without producing words. Harold Weber stepped into the awkward silence. "I'm Harold Weber," he said, extending his hand to Sarah. "Weber Dairy is east of your property." "Of course," Sarah nodded. "The Holstein crossbreeds. I noticed your rotational grazing setup. Very impressive." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know something about dairy farming. I know something about efficient land management, Sarah replied, and your operation appears to be exceptionally well run. Something in her tone, the genuine appreciation without flattery, seemed to catch Harold off guard. Been in the family for 3 generations, he said, a hint of pride breaking through. His skepticism. That kind of knowledge is invaluable, Sarah agreed. I hope you won't mind if I ask for advice occasionally. I have a lot to learn. Before Harold could respond, Diane Collins interjected. We heard you were some kind of corporate executive in Chicago. Bit of a change, isn't it, going from boardrooms to barnyards? The question was pointed, almost challenging, but Sarah didn't flinch. I was Chief Operations Officer for Agritech Innovations, she replied. We developed software to help large-scale farming operations optimize resource allocation and predict yield variables. A murmur ran through the group. Agritech was a name even these traditional farmers recognized. Their systems were used by some of the biggest agricultural corporations in the Midwest. That's a far cry from actually getting your hands dirty, Frank observed, though his tone had lost some of its earlier dismissiveness. You're absolutely right, Sarah acknowledged, with a frankness that seemed to surprise them, which is why I've spent the last 6 months studying sustainable farming practices and working with a mentor farm in Wisconsin. But there's no substitute for experience, and I'm not too proud to admit I have a steep learning curve ahead of me. May I ask why? Martha inquired, genuine curiosity breaking through her reserve. Why leave a successful career to take on a failing farm? Sarah glanced at her children before answering. When Agritech was acquired last year, the new parent company eliminated most of the executive positions. At first, it seemed like a disaster. But then my grandfather passed away and left me a modest inheritance. It made me reevaluate what I wanted my children to experience growing up. She looked around the room at the community that had gathered for generations. Emma and Josh's father isn't in the picture anymore. In Chicago, we lived in a high-rise apartment where they couldn't even have a pet. I wanted them to know what it means to build something real, to understand where food comes from, to experience the satisfaction of working with their hands. There was a sincerity in her words that was difficult to dismiss. But Bill Thompson remained skeptical. Noble sentiments, but farming isn't a hobby or a lifestyle choice for most of us. It's our livelihood, and it's harder than most city folks can imagine. I don't doubt that for a moment, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze directly. And I'm not approaching this as a hobby. I've invested everything I have into making the Peterson place productive again. I've developed a 5-year business plan, focusing on specialty crops and direct-to-consumer marketing strategies that should make the operation financially viable. She reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out a folder. In fact, that's partly why I came today. I was hoping to introduce myself to the community and also to find out if anyone might be willing to lease me some additional equipment until I can afford to purchase my own. The Peterson machinery is, well, in need of significant repairs. Frank and Harold exchanged glances. Equipment sharing wasn't uncommon among farming families, but usually only between those with established relationships and proven reliability. What exactly are you planning to grow? Frank asked, his tone more businesslike now. That land was traditionally wheat, but the soil's depleted. We're starting with 10 acres of high-value organic vegetables using intensive methods, Sarah explained. The remaining acreage will be planted with cover crops this year to rebuild soil health, mostly legumes to fix nitrogen and deep-rooted species to break up the compaction. By next year, we should be able to expand the vegetable production and potentially add some specialty grains. Her answer revealed more agricultural knowledge than any of them had expected. Josh, who had been quiet until now, added, "And we're going to have chickens. I get to collect the eggs every morning." His childish enthusiasm brought a few smiles to the farmers' faces, despite their skepticism. Young blood was rare in farming communities where the average age of producers had been rising steadily for decades. "Well, Miss Mitchell," Frank said, after a thoughtful pause, "I've got an old tiller that might serve your purposes for those vegetable plots. It's not fancy, but it runs. You're welcome to use it until you get your own equipment sorted out." It wasn't an effusive welcome, but it was a practical gesture of the kind farmers understood, a willingness to help a neighbor, even one they weren't convinced would succeed. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," Sarah said, recognizing the significance of the offer. "I appreciate that more than I can say." "Call me Frank," he replied with a nod. "Everyone does." Martha, watching the exchange, seemed to come to a decision. "Have you folks eaten yet? There's plenty of food, and you should meet the rest of the community if you're going to be staying." The qualification, "if you're going to be staying," revealed that Martha, like the others, still had her doubts. But the invitation itself was a small opening, a crack in the wall of skepticism. "We'd like that," Sarah said with a genuine smile. "Wouldn't we, kids?" Emma and Josh nodded enthusiastically, the prospect of homemade food after days of unpacking and setting up their new home clearly appealing. As Martha led them toward the buffet tables, the group of farmers watched with mixed expressions. None of them believed that Sarah Mitchell would still be farming when harvest season came around. Her plans sounded good in theory, but they had all seen the reality of farming destroy better-prepared operations than hers, yet something about her direct manner and evident preparation left them feeling less certain of her failure than they had been before meeting her. She was clearly no dilettante playing at being a farmer. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. $5 says she's gone by August," Bill Thompson murmured to Harold as they watched Sarah introduce herself to other community members. Harold considered this, watching as Sarah listened intently to old Walter Simmons describing the county's rainfall patterns, her notebook now in her hand rather than her daughter's. "I don't know," Harold said slowly. "There's something about her. I'm not saying she'll make it, mind you, but I'm not betting against her either." Frank, overhearing them, said nothing, but he made a mental note to check his shed for other equipment that might be useful for vegetable farming, just in case. 2 weeks after the planting festival, Sarah stood in the middle of her overgrown field, squinting against the early morning sun. The Peterson farmhouse behind her was still a work in progress. Fresh paint on the porch, new screens in the windows, but the roof needed repairs, and the ancient furnace made alarming noises on cold nights. Like everything else on the property, it required far more work than she had initially estimated. She consulted the soil test results that had arrived yesterday, confirming what she had suspected. Years of neglect had left the soil depleted and acidic. The amendments she needed would cost thousands she hadn't budgeted for. Another setback in a growing list. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew her attention. A mud-spattered pickup truck with Thompson Feed and Supply emblazoned on the door pulled into her driveway, Bill Thompson at the wheel. Sarah took a deep breath before walking over to meet him. "Morning, Miss Mitchell," Bill said as he climbed out of the truck. His tone was professionally polite, but carried an undercurrent of skepticism that hadn't diminished since their first meeting. "Got your order of organic fertilizer. Had to special order it from the distributor. Not much demand for that sort of thing around here." "I appreciate you going to the trouble," Sarah replied, watching as he lowered the truck's tailgate to unload. "The bags," Bill gestured toward the fields beyond the barn. "I see you've been busy. Got some of that cover crop planted?" "About 30 acres so far," Sarah confirmed. "The old tractor Frank lent me keeps breaking down, but we're making progress." "Heard you hired the miller boy to help with the heavy work," Sarah nodded. "Jake's been a godsend, strong back, good with engines. He's teaching Josh about the tractor while they work." "Jake's a good kid," Bill agreed, "but farming 10 acres of vegetables is a lot of labor without proper equipment." He shook his head as he surveyed the property. "Peterson ran this place with wheat for a reason. Lower labor, easier to mechanize, and increasingly lower margins, Sarah added. The math doesn't work for small-scale commodity crops anymore, Mr. Thompson. That's why Peterson couldn't make it. Bill frowned. Peterson farmed this land for 50 years, his father before him. They knew what they were doing. I'm sure they did, Sarah said carefully. But times have changed. Global markets, corporate consolidation, the economics of farming are different now. Maybe in your fancy computer models, Bill replied, his voice hardening. But here in the real world, trying to grow delicate vegetables in this climate is asking for trouble. First late frost, first hailstorm, first drought, you'll be wiped out. Sarah had heard variations of this warning from nearly everyone she'd met in Ridgeway Valley. The persistent skepticism was wearing, but she kept her expression neutral. That's why we're starting small and diversifying, and why I've installed drip irrigation on the vegetable acreage. Bill's eyebrows rose. That's a significant investment. It's necessary, Sarah replied. Water efficiency is going to be increasingly important with changing climate patterns. The historical rainfall data for this county shows increasing variability year over year. Before Bill could respond, Emma emerged from the barn, carrying a clipboard and wearing overalls that were already smudged with dirt despite the early hour. Mom, the seedlings in the greenhouse are showing signs of damping off. I think we need to adjust the ventilation. I'll be right there, honey, Sarah called back. Bill watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and something harder to define. Your little girl seems to be taking to farm life. Shame it won't last long enough for her to get proper calluses. The comment stung, but Sarah had grown accustomed to such jabs. Emma's always been a quick study. She's already keeping better records than I am. As if to prove her point, Emma approached and handed Bill a neatly written receipt. This is for the organic fertilizer, sir. Mom said to make sure we keep proper documentation for tax purposes. Bill accepted the paper with a bemused expression. Well, aren't you the little accountant? Actually, I want to be an agricultural scientist, Emma replied seriously. I've been reading about soil microbiology. Did you know that a single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth? Is that so? Bill replied, his condescension softening slightly in the face of the child's earnest enthusiasm. It's fascinating, Emma continued. There's an entire ecosystem we can't even see that determines whether crops succeed or fail. Mom says understanding that is just as important as knowing how to drive a tractor. Bill glanced at Sarah with newfound curiosity. You're teaching them a lot. They're teaching me too, Sarah admitted. Emma's research skills have been invaluable, and Josh has an intuitive touch with the chickens that I lack entirely. As if summoned by his name, Josh came running. From the direction of the chicken coop, his face alight with excitement. Mom, Henrietta laid an egg. Our first one. The pride in his voice brought a smile to Sarah's face despite her fatigue and worries. That's wonderful, buddy. Why don't you show Mr. Thompson? Josh proudly displayed the brown egg, holding it as carefully as if it were made of glass. We're going to save it for Emma's birthday breakfast tomorrow. And then when we have more eggs, we're going to sell them at the farmer's market. Mom says we can be in charge of the egg money. Bill Thompson looked from the egg to Josh's beaming face to Sarah's tired but determined expression. Something shifted in his demeanor, not approval exactly, but perhaps a grudging recognition that the Mitchell family's commitment went beyond what he had expected. Well, you better get a proper egg carton then, he said, reaching into his truck and pulling out a flat of empty cartons. These were headed for recycling, but sounds like you might have use for them soon. Josh accepted the gift with wide eyes. Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Just don't expect those fancy city folks to pay premium prices for eggs at your little stand, Bill added, unable to resist one more skeptical comment. People around here know what a dozen eggs should cost. Actually, Sarah interjected, We've already had inquiries from 3 restaurants in Madison about supplying them with pasture-raised organic eggs once we're up to capacity. They're willing to pay 4 times the supermarket price. Bill's expression clouded. Madison restaurants, that's your market, not local folks? Both, ideally, Sarah explained. But the economics work better with some direct-to-restaurant sales. The profit margins make the extra delivery costs worthwhile. So you're not even planning to support the local economy, Bill concluded, his momentary softening vanishing. Just using our land to service city appetites. Sarah felt a flare of frustration. I'll be hiring local labor, buying supplies locally when possible, and paying local taxes, Mr. Thompson. And I'm hoping to eventually supply your store with organic produce for local customers who want it. Don't hold your breath on that, Bill scoffed. My customers want affordable, conventional produce, not overpriced organic vegetables that look like they've been through a war. He climbed back into his truck, his face set in disapproving lines. Good luck with your fancy irrigation and your Madison restaurant customers, Ms. Mitchell. You'll need it when the real work of farming hits you. Sarah watched him drive away, the dust from his tires settling on her newly planted fields. Each day brought similar interactions, moments of connection undermined by deep skepticism, small kindnesses followed by dismissive predictions of her failure. Don't worry, Mom, Emma said, seeing the tension in Sarah's shoulders. Mr. Richardson at the hardware store said the same thing last week, and then he ended up giving us advice about fixing the greenhouse panels anyway. Sarah smiled at her. Perceptive daughter, you're right. Actions speak louder than words around here. And our actions are going to grow the best vegetables ever, Josh declared, with the absolute confidence only a 7-year-old could muster. Together, they walked back toward the greenhouse, but Sarah paused as she caught sight of an unfamiliar car slowing as it passed their property. The driver, a middle-aged man in a suit, seemed to be taking pictures with his phone. Who's that? Emma asked, following her mother's gaze. I don't know, Sarah replied, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. It was the 3rd such car this week, people who were clearly not locals, showing unusual interest in the Pearson place. Later that afternoon, as Sarah struggled to repair a broken pipe in the greenhouse irrigation system, she heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. Looking up, she recognized Frank Donovan's pickup truck. Unlike Bill Thompson, Frank had been true to his word about lending equipment, though his help always came with plenty of advice and warnings. Afternoon, Sarah, he called as he climbed out of the truck. In the 2 weeks since the festival, they had progressed to first names, a small but significant sign of acceptance. Saw you wrestling with that tiller earlier. Thought you might need a hand. Thanks, Frank, Sarah said gratefully, wiping sweat from her forehead and inadvertently leaving a streak of dirt. But I think I've got it figured out. The carburetor needed cleaning. Frank looked impressed despite himself. You know your way around small engines? My grandfather taught me the basics, Sarah explained. He had a workshop behind his house in Wisconsin. I spent summers there as a kid. Frank nodded appreciatively. Useful skills, but I actually came by to warn you about something. Sarah tensed. What's wrong? Been hearing rumors at the diner, Frank said, lowering his voice, though there was no one else around. Midwest Agricultural Investments has been asking questions about properties in the area. Harold Weber said a representative approached him last week about selling his southeast parcel. Midwest Agricultural Investments? Sarah repeated, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the breeze that had picked up. The corporate farming operation? Frank nodded grimly. They've been buying up small farms all through the state, consolidating them into industrial-scale operations. Word is, they're looking to establish a major presence in this county. And they're interested in my land? Sarah asked, pieces falling into place. The mysterious cars, the strangers taking photos. Can't say for certain, Frank replied, but that Pearson place has the best water access in the valley. Old Peterson dug those wells extra deep back in the 60s before anyone worried about aquifer depletion. That's valuable to a corporate operation. Sarah felt sick. She had invested everything she had, financially and emotionally, into this fresh start. They can't force me to sell. No, Frank agreed, but they can make it mighty uncomfortable to refuse. They've been known to buy surrounding properties and then create problems for holdouts, restricting access roads, filing nuisance complaints, that sort of thing. He hesitated before adding, some folks around here might see selling to MAI as a good thing. They pay fair market value and they do hire local for some positions. Not everyone shares your vision of small-scale organic farming. The implication was clear. Sarah might find herself even more isolated if corporate interests divided the community. It was yet another challenge she hadn't anticipated. Thanks for the warning, she said, straightening her shoulders. But I didn't. And come this far to give up at the first sign of pressure. Frank studied her for a long moment before a slow smile spread across his weathered face. Didn't figure you for a quitter. Just wanted you to know what you might be up against. As he turned, to leave, he added, by the way, Martha wanted me to ask if you and the kids would like to come to Sunday dinner this weekend. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and whatever's ready in the garden. The invitation caught Sarah by surprise. It was the first social overture any of the farming families had extended. We'd like that very much, she said, trying not to sound as touched as she felt. Frank nodded. 4 o'clock then. And Sarah, might want to bring that business plan of yours. I know some folks who might be interested in hearing more about those direct-to-restaurant sales you mentioned. Could be there's something to your approach, different as it is. After he drove away, Sarah stood in the middle of her fledgling farm. The greenhouse, with its tender seedlings, the newly fenced chicken coop, the acres of cover crop beginning to green the long-neglected fields, and felt the full weight of the challenges ahead. Equipment breakdowns, soil remediation, skeptical neighbors, corporate pressure. But then she heard Emma's voice from the farmhouse, calling Josh to help prepare dinner, and she remembered why she had taken this risk in the first place, not just to build a sustainable business, but to give her children roots, purpose, and the satisfaction of creating something meaningful with their own hands. The sun was setting over Ridgeway Valley, casting long shadows across land that had been farmed by generations of families before her. Sarah was an outsider, a city woman with book knowledge and determination rather than a lifetime of practical experience. But as she walked toward the house where her children waited, she felt a growing certainty that this place, challenging and unwelcoming as it sometimes seemed, was exactly where they belonged. What she didn't yet know was that the greatest test of that conviction was still to come, and it would arrive much sooner than harvest season. The invitation to Sunday dinner at the Donovan farm marked a turning point for Sarah and her children. Though they'd still face skepticism and resistance, that simple gesture of hospitality had opened a small door into the close-knit Ridgeway Valley community. As April turned to May, the Mitchell farm began to show visible signs of transformation. The greenhouse burst with seedlings ready for transplanting. The chicken flock had grown to 24 hens, all now laying regularly. The first rows of early spring vegetables, radishes, spinach, and peas, formed neat green lines across what had once been neglected fields. Even the farmhouse looked more welcoming, with potted flowers on the porch and curtains in the windows. But for every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. The ancient tractor broke down again, this time with a hydraulic system failure that would cost nearly $1,000 to repair. A late frost threatened the newly transplanted seedlings, forcing Sarah and the children to spend an entire night covering rows with protective fabric. And the corporate interest in her property hadn't waned. If anything, it had intensified. On a warm Tuesday morning in mid-May, Sarah was kneeling in the dirt, carefully setting out tomato seedlings, when a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled into her driveway. She straightened, brushing soil from her hands, as a man in an expensive suit emerged from the vehicle. "Ms. Mitchell," he called, picking his way carefully along the gravel path in shoes that clearly weren't meant for farm visits. "Robert Carlson, Midwest Agricultural Investments." He extended a manicured hand that Sarah briefly shook with her dirt-covered one. "What can I do for you, Mr. Carlson?" she asked, though she knew exactly why he was there. "I was hoping we might have a conversation about your property," he replied, with a practiced smile. "CEI has been developing a significant presence in this region, and your land has certain features that would complement our operations nicely." Sarah gestured toward the farmhouse porch. "I've got fresh lemonade inside, if you'd like some while we talk." Carlson followed her to the porch, his eyes taking in every detail of the farm, not with the dismissive skepticism of her neighbors, but with the calculating assessment of someone measuring an asset's value. Once they were seated with glasses of lemonade, Carlson wasted no time getting to business. "Ms. Mitchell, I'll be direct. I would like to purchase your property. We're prepared to offer 30% above market value, significantly more than you paid just months ago." Sarah took a slow sip of her lemonade. "I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Carlson." He smiled indulgently, as if she'd made a naive comment. "I understand you've put in considerable work already. We'd be happy to compensate you for those improvements as well." "It's not about the money," Sarah replied. "I bought this farm to build something meaningful for my family. It's not for sale." Carlson's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Farming is a difficult business, Ms. Mitchell, especially for someone without experience. The capital requirements alone can be overwhelming for small operations." He gestured toward the visible patches on her ancient tractor. "Equipment failures, weather events, market fluctuations, the risks are substantial." "I'm aware of the challenges," Sarah said evenly. "Are you aware that MAI has purchased the Simmons property to the north of you?" Carlson asked, his tone casual, but his gaze intent. "We'll be converting those fields to industrial corn production next season. That will involve significant chemical applications, of course." The threat was thinly veiled. Chemical drift could destroy Sarah's organic certification and devastate her crops. "That's concerning," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "But I'm sure MAI is familiar with buffer zone requirements for chemical applications near organic operations." Carlson's smile tightened. "Regulations can be open to interpretation, and enforcement in rural areas is often limited." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Carlson?" "Not at all," he replied smoothly, simply outlining business realities. "Similarly, you should know that we're in discussions with the county about widening the access road that runs along your eastern boundary. That project would likely require taking a slice of your property through eminent domain." Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sounds like you've been busy." "We're very thorough," Carlson agreed. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Here's our formal offer. I encourage you to review it carefully and consult with a financial advisor. The terms are exceptionally generous, far more than you're likely to earn from this experiment in small-scale farming." He stood, straightening his suit jacket. "I'll give you 2 weeks to consider. After that, the offer decreases by 5% each month." His smile returned, sharp as a blade. "Market forces at work, you understand?" After Carlson departed, Sarah sat on the porch steps, the unopened envelope heavy in her hands. The threats were clear: chemical drift, road construction, decreasing property values, all designed to pressure her into selling. "Mom?" Emma's voice came from behind her. "Who was that man?" Sarah turned to find both her children standing in the doorway, their expressions concerned. She wondered how much they had overheard. "Just someone interested in our farm," she said, trying to keep her voice light. Emma's perceptive gaze fell to the envelope. Is he trying to make us leave? Sarah hesitated, torn between protecting her children from worry and her commitment to honesty with them. Some people think this land would be better used for large-scale farming, she finally explained. But that's not what we want, is it? No way, Josh exclaimed. Our chickens would hate that. And what about our tomatoes? And the farmers' market stand we're building? His innocent indignation brought a genuine smile to Sarah's face. Exactly. This is our home now, and we're not going anywhere. But later that night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open to the farm's financial spreadsheets. The numbers were sobering. The irrigation system had cost more than budgeted. The soil amendments were an ongoing expense. Equipment repairs were draining their reserves. At this rate, they'd be operating in the red well before their first significant harvest. The envelope from MAI sat unopened beside her keyboard. The amount inside would solve all their financial problems in an instant. She could buy a comfortable house in Madison, put money away for the children's education, maybe even start a smaller, less ambitious farm closer to the city. A soft knock at the kitchen door interrupted her thoughts. Through the window, she was surprised to see Frank Donovan standing on her back porch, his expression grave. "Frank," she said as she opened the door, "is everything all right?" "Saw the MAI car here today," he replied without preamble. "Thought I should check on you." Sarah gestured for him to come in and poured him a cup of coffee. "Word travels fast. Small community," Frank said with a shrug, "especially when it comes to outsiders." He settled his large frame carefully on one of her kitchen chairs. What did Carlson have to say? Sarah told him about the offer and the veiled threats, watching Frank's weathered face grow increasingly troubled. "They're playing hardball right away," he observed. "Must want your water rights pretty badly." "What should I do?" Sarah asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Frank studied her for a long moment. "Can't tell you that. It's your land, your future." He took a sip of coffee. "But I will say this, MAI came after my western parcel last year, offered a good price too." "You didn't sell," Sarah noted. "No," Frank confirmed. "Denovans have worked that land for 3 generations. Some things matter more than money." He set his cup down carefully. "But I didn't have young children to consider. Wasn't starting from scratch with depleted soil and broken equipment." His honesty was both refreshing and disheartening. "You think I should sell," Sarah concluded. "Didn't say that," Frank replied. "Just laying out the realities. My play's rough. If you're going to fight them, you need to know what you're up against." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded newspaper clipping. Article from the county paper last year. Farmer, over in Grant County, held out against MAI. They bought all the surrounding land, then started applying aerial pesticides on windy days. His organic certification was revoked after tests showed chemical residue on his crops. Sarah felt sick. "That's despicable." "It's business," Frank said grimly. "At least their version of it." He hesitated before adding, "There's been talk down at the diner. Some folks think MAI moving in would bring jobs, infrastructure improvements. Others worry about what happens when corporations control the land, communities divided." "And where do you stand?" Sarah asked. Frank's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Been farming independently for 40 years. Not about to change my ways now." He stood, placing his empty cup in the sink. "But whatever you decide, you shouldn't face MAI alone. They've got lawyers, money, influence." "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked. "Come to the community council meeting Thursday night," Frank replied. "Might be good for folks to hear directly from you about your plans and about MAI's tactics." After Frank left, Sarah returned to her spreadsheets, but the numbers hadn't improved. The financial challenge of small-scale farming remained daunting. especially now with corporate pressure added to the equation. She was about to close her laptop when an email notification appeared. Opening it, she found a message from Chef Laurent at Terroir, one of Madison's most acclaimed farm-to-table restaurants. Ms. Mitchell, I visited your website and am intrigued by your sustainable farming methods. We're looking for a reliable source of truly organic produce for our summer menu. Could we discuss a potential arrangement? I'd be happy to visit your farm next week to see your operation firsthand. Sarah read the email twice, her spirits lifting. This was exactly the kind of direct relationship with restaurants she'd been hoping to develop, but she hadn't expected interest from such a prestigious establishment so soon before they even had significant harvest to show. She quickly drafted a response, inviting Chef Laurent to visit the following Tuesday. Then she turned back to her financial projections and adjusted the revenue forecasts. If they could secure even a modest contract with Terroir, it would significantly improve their cash flow outlook for the summer months. As she finally climbed the stairs to bed, exhausted but with a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah paused at the children's rooms. Emma slept with a farming textbook still open beside her. Josh had fallen asleep, clutching the small notebook where he recorded each chicken's daily egg production. They had embraced this new life wholeheartedly, adapting to challenges and setbacks with remarkable resilience. The move to Ridgeway Valley had already changed them. Emma was more confident, Josh more responsible. They were learning lessons about perseverance and hard work that no city upbringing could have provided. Sarah wouldn't give that up. Not for May's money, not for an easier path. The farm wasn't just a business venture. It was becoming the home they had all been searching for. Thursday evening found Sarah sitting anxiously in the back row of the Ridgeway Valley Community Center, waiting for the monthly council meeting to begin. She had dressed carefully, practical clothes that wouldn't mark her as an outsider, but neat enough to show respect for the occasion. Emma and Josh sat beside her, unusually subdued. They understood this meeting was important, though Sarah had kept the details of MAI's threats from them. Emma had her ever-present notebook open, ready to take notes. Josh fidgeted with the small wooden chicken figure he'd been whittling under Frank's tutelage. The room gradually filled with familiar faces, farmers. She'd met at the planting festival, shopkeepers from town, Martha Donovan, who gave her a small but genuine smile. Bill Thompson nodded curtly from across the room, his expression unreadable. But there were unfamiliar faces too, men in business casual attire who stood together near the front, their postures suggesting authority and confidence. One of them was Robert Carlson. His eyes widened slightly when he spotted Sarah, then narrowed calculatingly. Frank Donovan took the seat beside Sarah. MAI's brought reinforcements, he murmured, nodding toward the group. Regional director and their environmental compliance officer. They don't usually bother with community meetings unless they're planning something big. Before Sarah could respond, Harold Weber called the meeting to order. As council president, he worked through routine matters efficiently. Road maintenance, updates, the upcoming county fair planning, a proposal for new playground equipment at the elementary school. Then Harold cleared his throat. Next item on the agenda. Midwest Agricultural Investments has requested time to present their development plans for recently acquired properties in Ridgeway Valley. Robert Carlson stepped forward, his smile confident as he faced the community. Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Carlson, representing MAI. We're excited to share our vision for sustainable agricultural development in your beautiful valley. As he launched into a polished presentation, complete with digital slides showing job creation projections and economic impact figures. Sarah felt a growing knot in her stomach. Carlson painted a picture of prosperity and progress, new infrastructure, employment opportunities, increased tax revenue for the county. It was compelling, especially for a farming community that had seen its share of economic struggles. What he carefully avoided mentioning were the environmental impacts of industrial-scale farming, the fate of small producers who couldn't compete, or the fact that profits would flow to distant corporate shareholders rather than being reinvested locally. When Carlson finished, there was a smattering of applause, primarily from the non-farming residents who saw only the promise of economic growth. Harold opened the floor for questions, and several hands went up. "What about chemical use?" asked an older woman Sarah didn't recognize. "My well is downstream from the old Simmons place." "Excellent question," Carlson replied smoothly. "MAI adheres to all EPA guidelines for agricultural chemical application. Our environmental compliance team continuously monitors soil and water quality to ensure no contamination occurs." It was a non-answer wrapped in corporate reassurance, but the woman nodded, apparently satisfied. "Will you be hiring local?" called out a man from the back. "Absolutely," Carlson confirmed. "While some specialized positions require specific expertise, we anticipate creating 30 to 40 jobs for area residents in the first phase alone." The questions continued. Most met with similarly practiced responses that sounded reassuring but committed to very little. Sarah noticed Frank shifting impatiently beside her. Finally, he raised his hand. When Harold acknowledged him, Frank stood. "Mr. Carlson, can you address the reports from Grant County about chemical drift from MAI operations contaminating neighboring organic farms?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Carlson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not familiar with any verified reports of that nature, Mr. Donovan. If you have specific concerns, I'd be happy to discuss them after the meeting." "I have a copy of the county agricultural inspector's report right here," Frank persisted, holding up a document. "Shows residue levels well above organic certification thresholds on 3 separate farms adjacent to MAI operations." Carlson's colleague, the environmental compliance officer, stepped forward. "Those findings were later determined to be inconclusive. Multiple potential sources of contamination existed in the area." "Convenient," Frank remarked dryly before sitting down. Harold cleared his throat. "Any other questions for MAI before we move on?" Sarah felt Emma nudge her. "Mom," she whispered urgently, "you should say something." Sarah hesitated, acutely aware of being an outsider in this community. But then she thought of the veiled threats, the pressure tactics, the environmental risks that Carlson had so carefully glossed over. Slowly, she raised her hand. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell," Harold acknowledged, his expression curious. Sarah stood, feeling all eyes turned toward her. "Mr. Carlson, you mentioned MI's commitment to sustainable agriculture. Could you elaborate on your soil management practices? Specifically, how do you address issues like erosion, carbon sequestration, and long-term soil fertility without relying exclusively on synthetic inputs?" The question, technical, specific, and directly challenging the heart of MAI's industrial farming model, caught Carlson off guard. He glanced at his colleagues before responding. "We employ modern science-based approaches to soil management," he began, falling back on generalities. "Our agronomists continually monitor soil health indicators and adjust inputs accordingly. So primarily, a chemical-intensive approach rather than biological methods," Sarah pressed. "What about cover cropping, reduced tillage, integrated pest management?" A different kind of murmur ran through the room now. Sarah's questions demonstrated knowledge that many hadn't expected from the city woman playing at farming. She could feel the shift in perception, from outsider to potentially valuable voice in the conversation about their community's agricultural future. Carlson's professional veneer cracked slightly. "MAI balances productivity with sustainability. Ms. Mitchell, our methods are proven effective at scale, which is something small hobby farms simply can't achieve." The dismissive term hobby farms wasn't lost on anyone in the room, including several small-scale producers who had been farming sustainably for generations. Before Sarah could respond, Bill Thompson surprisingly spoke up. Mitchell Farm isn't exactly a hobby operation from what I've seen. They've got plans for commercial production, direct marketing to restaurants. Different approach than MAI, but not just playing around. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but coming from one of her earliest skeptics, it carried weight. Several other farmers nodded in agreement. Harold Weber studied the room thoughtfully before addressing Carlson. Seems like our community has some real concerns about how MAI's operations might impact existing farms. Maybe we should form a committee to review your environmental mitigation plans in more detail before any further development proceeds. Carlson's smile was now visibly strained. Of course, we're happy to provide additional information. MAI values community input. He gathered his materials. But I should note that our development timeline is rather tight. Any significant delays could impact our ability to deliver the economic benefits we've outlined. The threat was subtle but clear: cooperate quickly or lose the promised prosperity. But Sarah could tell from the expressions around the room that Carlson's pressure tactics had backfired. Ridgeway Valley farmers might have their differences, but they didn't appreciate outsiders trying to rush them into decisions about their land and community. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah found herself surrounded by neighbors wanting to discuss Me's plans and, to her surprise, her own farming approach. The conversation continued in the parking lot, with Frank Donovan eventually suggesting they reconvene at Diane's diner for coffee and more discussion. Looking at the animated faces around her, people who had viewed her with skepticism just weeks before, Sarah realized something important had shifted tonight. She was no longer simply the city woman who didn't belong. She had become a farmer with a voice worth hearing, a neighbor with concerns that resonated, a potential ally in preserving the agricultural character of Ridgeway Valley. The battle with MAI was far from over. In fact, it had likely just begun. But for the first time since arriving, Sarah felt she wasn't fighting alone. The community meeting had changed something in Ridgeway Valley. In the days that followed, Sarah noticed subtle shifts in how people treated her. A wave from a passing farmer who had previously ignored her, an extra carton of strawberry plants thrown in on the house when she visited the nursery. In the next town, a group of local teenagers asking if she needed help setting fence posts for the expanded chicken yard. Most surprising was Bill Thompson's visit 4 days after the meeting. He arrived in his feed store truck, ostensibly to deliver chicken feed, but he lingered afterward, inspecting her vegetable rows with a critical eye. "Your irrigation setup is actually pretty clever," he admitted grudgingly, examining the drip system she'd installed. "Saves water, puts it right where the plants need it." "Thanks," Sarah replied, surprise evident in her voice. "I learned about it from a farm in California that deals with chronic water shortages." Bill nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense here too. Last 3 summers have been drier than normal." He kicked at the soil with the toe of his boot. "Cover crops taking nicely, soil structures already improving." It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from Bill, it felt like a major victory. As he turned to leave, he paused. "Been thinking about what you said about those Madison restaurants. Might be something to it." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Got a couple regular customers asking for organic produce. Not enough to matter yet, but might be a trend worth watching." "I'd be happy to supply your store when we're producing more," Sarah offered. "Local customers should have first access." Bill seemed to appreciate that. "I'll keep it in mind." The interaction left Sarah feeling cautiously optimistic. The community's initial rejection was slowly giving way to something that, if not acceptance, was at least open-minded curiosity about her approach. That cautious optimism took a serious blow the following morning. Sarah was in the greenhouse checking on seedlings when she heard Emma scream from the direction of the chicken coop. Heart pounding, she ran toward the sound, terrified that her daughter had been injured. She found Emma standing at the coop entrance, tears streaming down her face. Inside, the scene was horrific. 6 chickens lay dead on the floor, while others huddled in corners, clearly distressed. The coop itself was in disarray, as if a whirlwind had torn through it. "What happened?" Sarah gasped, pulling Emma away from the doorway. "I don't know," Emma sobbed. "They were fine when I collected eggs last night. This morning, when I came to let them out." She dissolved into tears again, burying her face against Sarah's shoulder. Josh came running from the house, stopping short, when he saw Emma crying. "What's wrong? What happened to the chickens?" Sarah sent him back to the house to call Frank, while she examined the coop more carefully. The dead birds showed no obvious signs of predator attack, no bite marks, no missing feathers. The coop door had been securely latched, making it unlikely that a fox or weasel had gotten in. Something about the scene felt deliberate, calculated. Frank arrived 20 minutes later, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. "This wasn't natural causes," he concluded, kneeling to examine one of the birds. "And it wasn't a predator." He pointed to a fine white powder residue along the edges of the feed trough. "Looks like something was mixed in with their feed." "Poison," Sarah whispered, making sure the children were out of earshot. Frank nodded grimly. "Can't say for certain without testing, but I'd bet on it." "Who would do this?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Frank's weathered face hardened. "Someone sending a message, making it clear what happens to folks who don't cooperate." "My," Sarah said, the name coming out like a curse. "Can't prove it," Frank cautioned. "But timing's suspicious. You publicly challenged them at the meeting, refused their offer, and 4 days later this happens." He stood, dusting his hands on his jeans. "Message is clear enough. If they can get to your chickens, they can get to your crops, or worse." A cold fear settled in Sarah's stomach, different from the worry over finances or equipment failures. This was a direct threat not just to her farm, but potentially to her family. "Should I call the sheriff?" Frank considered this. Should, but without proof. He left the sentence unfinished. "Might be better to focus on protection, security cameras, better locks. I've got some motion detector lights in my barn that I never installed. Could set those up for you." They spent the next hour burying the dead chickens, Emma and Josh insisting on a proper ceremony with small wooden crosses Josh made from popsicle sticks. Sarah's heart broke, watching them say goodbye to the birds they had named and cared for. This was supposed to be a place where they learned about the natural cycle of life, not about human cruelty and intimidation. That evening, as Sarah sat at her kitchen table updating the farm's ledger with the cost of replacing the chickens, she heard a vehicle approaching. Looking out the window, she was surprised to see 3 trucks pulling into her driveway. Frank's familiar pickup, Harold Weber's dual-wheel farm truck, and most surprisingly, Bill Thompson's feed store delivery vehicle. "Stay inside and lock the doors," she instructed the children before stepping onto the porch. The 3 men approached, their expressions serious. Behind them, 2 more trucks arrived, Walter Simmons and his son, followed by Jake Miller's father, David. "Evening, Sarah," Frank said, speaking for the group. "Heard about what happened with your chickens." "Word travels fast," Sarah replied, echoing their exchange from a few nights before. "Small community," Frank agreed with a slight smile, "especially when it comes to outsiders." But this time, the word outsiders didn't seem directed at her. Harold Weber stepped forward. Thing is, Sarah, we may have our differences about farming methods, but there are lines you don't cross. Attacking a family's livestock is one of them. Bill Thompson nodded grimly. Doesn't matter if you're organic, conventional, or dancing naked under the full moon while planting. This drew a surprised laugh from Sarah. You don't mess with another farmer's livelihood. Not in this valley. We brought some things, Walter Simmons added, gesturing toward the trucks. In the truck beds, Sarah could see lumber, tools, fencing materials, and what looked like security equipment. We're going to help you secure the place, David Miller explained. Build a proper fence around the chicken yard, install some security. Lights and cameras reinforce the coop. And Bill's brought 20 replacement chickens, Frank added, pullets already laying. Sarah was speechless, overwhelmed by this unexpected show of support. Why? She finally managed. The men exchanged glances. Because the next time, it might be one of our farms, Harold explained pragmatically. May I doesn't take rejection well. If they're willing to do this to you, there's no telling what they might do to any of us who refuse to sell. And, Frank added quietly, because it's the right thing to do. You're one of us now, Sarah. You stood up for sustainable farming at that meeting, asked the questions we should have been asking, showed you're serious about this place. For the next 3 hours, under the glow of truck headlights, the men worked to secure Sarah's farm. They installed motion-activated security lights around the perimeter, built a predator-proof fence around an expanded chicken yard, reinforced. The coop with wire mesh, even a determined weasel couldn't penetrate, and set up 3 security cameras that would record to a hard drive in the house. Martha Donovan and several other farm wives arrived with casseroles and desserts, turning the evening into an impromptu work party. Emma and Josh moved among the adults, holding flashlights and fetching tools, their earlier distress transforming into excitement at the community response. As the work neared completion, the sound of another vehicle drew everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and Robert Carlson stepped out, his face registering obvious surprise at the gathering. "Miss Mitchell," he called, approaching with his practiced smile firmly in place. "I was in the area and thought I'd check whether you'd had a chance to review our offer." The work around the chicken coop came to an abrupt halt as every person present turned to stare at Carlson. The corporate representative faltered slightly under the collective gaze of nearly a dozen farmers. "Mr. Carlson," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "What a coincidence that you'd stop by just hours after someone poisoned my chickens." Carlson's smile vanished. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Bill Thompson interjected, stepping forward with his considerable bulk. "Just like Mai doesn't know anything about that chemical drift over in Grant County, or those mysterious equipment failures the Rodriguez family experienced before they finally sold out, or the sudden water rights dispute that bankrupted the Hendersons." Carlson's face had gone carefully blank. "I assure you MAI operates with the highest ethical standards. If you're experiencing problems with your livestock, perhaps it's due to your limited experience in animal husbandry." Frank Donovan moved to stand beside Sarah, the other farmers forming a loose semicircle behind them. "I've been raising chickens for 40 years, he said mildly. "Never seen them die like that from natural causes. Strange coincidence it happened right after Sarah refused your offer. And stranger still that you'd show up hours later," Harold added, "almost like you were checking to see if your message was received." Carlson's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate what you're implying. MI is offering legitimate business, opportunities that would benefit this entire community. If Ms. Mitchell chooses to reject our generous offer, that's her prerogative. But I suggest you all consider carefully before aligning yourselves against progress." He looked pointedly at the security cameras being installed. "Cameras can be a double-edged sword, Ms. Mitchell. They document everything that happens on a property, including any violations of agricultural regulations. I'm sure your operation is completely up to code, but small farms sometimes struggle with compliance. The threat was clear. If she fought back, MAI would find or create violations to report. Sarah felt a surge of anger. This man had likely ordered the killing of her chickens, was threatening her livelihood, and was now standing on her property, intimidating her in front of her children. Something inside her snapped. "Mr. Carlson," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I'm going to ask you to leave my property now. My answer to MAI's offer is no. It will continue to be no, regardless of how many chickens you kill or threats you make." She took a step toward him, and to her surprise, he took a small step back. "Furthermore, I've installed security cameras around the property, as you can see. Any future incidents will be documented and reported to the sheriff, the EPA, the USDA, and anyone else who might be interested in MAI's business practices. I've also taken the liberty," she continued, drawing strength from the solid presence of her neighbors beside her, "of documenting our conversation from the other day, including your veiled threats about chemical applications and eminent domain. I've shared that documentation with my lawyer and with several environmental organizations who track corporate agricultural practices." This was a bluff. She had no lawyer, had not recorded their conversation, but the flicker of uncertainty in Carlson's eyes suggested it hit home. "You're making a serious mistake," he warned, his corporate polish cracking further. "MAI isn't some small-time operation you can intimidate with amateur security measures and empty threats." "Neither am I," Sarah replied. "I'm not just some city woman playing farmer anymore, Mr. Carlson. I'm a Ridgeway Valley farmer with neighbors who understand exactly what you're trying to do here." She gestured to the group behind her. "And we're not selling, not me, not Frank, not Harold, not anyone else you've been pressuring." Harold Weber stepped forward. "MAI is welcome to purchase available properties from willing sellers at fair market value. But the pressure tactics stop now. Otherwise, the County Agricultural Commission, which I happen to chair, might need to review all MAI operations in this jurisdiction very carefully." Carlson looked from face to face, clearly reassessing the situation. What had seemed like an easy target, an inexperienced woman trying to farm alone, had somehow transformed into a united community front. "This isn't over," he said finally, retreating toward his vehicle. "MAI has development plans for this valley that won't be derailed by a group of stubborn holdouts clinging to outdated farming models." "Maybe not," Frank called after him, "but you'll find we're a lot harder to push around as a group than you thought." As Carlson's SUV disappeared down the driveway, a spontaneous cheer went up from the assembled neighbors. Martha Donovan pulled Sarah into a quick, firm hug. "Knew you had backbone the moment you walked into that festival," she said approvingly. "Just had to see if you had staying power too." The impromptu work party transformed into a celebration of sorts. More neighbors arrived, bringing food and drinks. Someone produced a portable radio, and country music filled the yard. The children, including Emma and Josh, played tag among the newly installed fence posts. As twilight deepened into night, Sarah found herself sitting on her porch steps beside Frank, watching the community that had initially rejected her now mingling comfortably on her property. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing in me, for bringing everyone together." Frank shrugged. "Wasn't just me. You earned their respect, Sarah. Standing up to MAI at the meeting, asking those smart questions, showing you've got real knowledge behind your plans." He took a sip from his coffee mug. "And those kids of yours, way they've taken to farm life, keeping records, learning everything they can. People notice that kind of commitment." Sarah watched as Emma showed several local children how to properly hold a chicken, her confidence evident in every movement. Josh was deep in conversation with Walter Simmons, carefully documenting something in his chicken notebook while the older farmer nodded approvingly. "I wasn't sure we belonged here," Sarah admitted. "Even after weeks of work, it still felt like we were outsiders trying to fit into a world that didn't want us." "Farm communities are slow to accept newcomers," Frank acknowledged, especially ones with different ideas. But once you're in for good. He gestured toward the gathering. This isn't just about standing against MAI. It's about welcoming you to Ridgeway Valley, properly this time. As if to confirm his words, Bill Thompson approached with a plate of Martha's berry cobbler. "Sarah," he said, his usual gruffness softened slightly. "Been thinking about your restaurant connections. I've got a cousin who runs a farm-to-table place in Madison. Might be interested in your eggs and vegetables. I could put in a word if you're still looking for buyers." Sarah accepted the plate with a smile. "I'd appreciate that, Bill. My first restaurant client is visiting next week, Terroir. If that goes well, I might need help scaling up production sooner than expected." Bill's eyebrows rose. Terroir. Fancy place. He seemed impressed despite himself. "Tell you what, my nephew's got a small tractor he's looking to sell. Nothing fancy, but it's newer than that antique you've been nursing along. Might be willing to work out a payment plan if you're interested." The offer, both the business connection and the equipment, represented more than just practical help. It was acknowledgement of Sarah's legitimacy as a farmer and a tentative extension of trust. "I'd like that," Sarah replied simply. As the evening wound down and neighbors began to depart, each stopping to shake Sarah's hand or pat her shoulder, she felt a profound shift in her relationship to this land and community. What had begun as an outsider's desperate gamble, a city woman trying to create a new life, had transformed into something with roots and connections, something that belonged. The chicken coop was secure, with 20 new hens already settling onto their roosts. The security lights cast a protective glow around the property. The fields were gradually healing under the cover crops, preparing for future harvests. And most importantly, Sarah and her children were no longer alone in their struggle. They had a community, skeptical and rough-edged at times, but ultimately willing to stand beside them when it mattered most. As she tucked the children into bed that night, Josh asked sleepily, "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" Sarah smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "Yes, buddy. I think we're going to be just fine." "Because of our neighbors?" Emma asked from the doorway of her room. Sarah nodded. "Partly, but also because we didn't give up, even when things got hard. We showed everyone that we belong here. We're real farmers now," Josh declared with satisfaction before drifting off to sleep. Sarah stood for a moment in the hallway between her children's rooms, listening to the unfamiliar but comforting sounds of a farm at night, the distant lowing of Harold's cows, the whisper of wind through fields of emerging crops, the occasional call of a nightbird. From her window, she could see the security lights Frank and the others had installed, standing guard over the small empire she was building. MAI would be back, she knew. Corporate interests rarely gave up so easily. But when they returned, they would find not an isolated woman easy to intimidate, but a farmer with deep and growing roots in a community that protected its own. The pivotal confrontation with Carlson had transformed her status in Ridgeway Valley. She was no longer the city woman playing at farming. She was Sarah Mitchell, organic farmer, neighbor, and now defender of the valley's agricultural independence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were still crops to tend, a restaurant client to impress, equipment to repair. But for tonight, Sarah allowed herself to feel the quiet triumph of having stood her ground, and against all expectations found her place in this community that had seemed so impenetrable just months before. The weeks following the confrontation with Carlson brought a steady transformation to both the Mitchell farm and Sarah's place in the Ridgeway Valley community. June arrived with long, sun-drenched days that pushed the crops skyward. The vegetable beds flourished under Sarah's careful tending, the first harvests of early greens and radishes already finding their way to local tables. The chickens, including Bill's replacement flock, were producing steadily, with Emma and Josh managing the egg collection and sales with growing confidence. But the most remarkable change was in how the community now embraced the Mitchells. Neighbors regularly stopped by to offer advice, lend equipment, or simply check in. Harold Webber's teenage daughter began watching Emma and Josh one afternoon a week so Sarah could focus on farm work. Martha Donovan brought over jars of home-canned vegetables to tide you over until your own harvest comes in. Even the most skeptical old-timers now nodded respectfully when they passed Sarah at the feed store or post office. The visit from Chef Laurent of Terroir Restaurant had exceeded all expectations. The renowned chef had spent hours touring the farm, asking detailed questions about Sarah's growing methods and sampling the early produce. By the end of his visit, he had committed to purchasing everything from specialty greens to heirloom, tomatoes and free-range eggs once they became available. The contract he offered included prices that made Sarah's carefully calculated profit projections suddenly seem conservative. "This is exactly what we've been searching for," he had explained, gesturing toward the neat rows of vegetables. "True organic production with transparency and commitment to soil health. Our customers care about these things, and they're willing to pay for them." Two more restaurants had followed Terroir's lead after hearing about Chef Laurent's enthusiasm, and Sarah found herself suddenly facing a new and unexpected challenge: how to meet the demand. The small-scale production she had planned for her first year would need to scale up significantly, requiring more labor, more infrastructure, and more investment. On a warm Wednesday afternoon in late June, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with Frank, Harold, and surprisingly Bill Thompson discussing the farm's future. "You've got three options as I see it," Frank said pragmatically, studying the production projections Sarah had laid out. "Scale back the contracts to match your current capacity, hire additional help to increase production, or find partner farms." "To share the contracts. I'd hate to scale back when we've got confirmed buyers," Sarah replied, frowning at the numbers. "These restaurant contracts could provide financial stability for years if we can meet their needs consistently." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Labor's the real bottleneck. Jake Miller's been a good worker, but you need more hands, especially as harvest season ramps up." "What about a partnership approach?" Bill suggested, surprising everyone with his business-minded thinking. "My nephew Ryan's got 5 acres he hasn't planted yet. Was going to do corn, but he might be interested in growing some of these specialty vegetables under contract to you. You'd coordinate with the restaurants, maintain the relationships, ensure quality standards, and take a percentage." Sarah considered this. "Like a small producers cooperative?" "Something like that," Bill agreed. "You've got the market connections and the knowledge of organic methods. Others have land and labor capacity. Seems like a natural fit." "Could work," Frank mused. "Weber's youngest boy has been talking about transitioning part of their land to vegetable production. And the Rodriguez family over in Hillsborough does beautiful organic work already. Just lacks the restaurant connections." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. What had begun as her personal project could potentially grow into something that benefited multiple local farms. "I'd want to ensure everything meets the same quality and sustainability standards. The restaurants are paying premium prices because they trust our growing methods. Would need clear agreements," Harold cautioned. "Production expectations, quality standards, profit sharing. Nothing kills partnerships faster than misunderstandings about money." As they continued discussing logistics, a familiar vehicle drove past the house slowly, Robert Carlson's black SUV. Though MAI had maintained a presence in the community, acquiring several more properties from willing sellers, they had kept their distance from Sarah's farm since the night of the confrontation. The security cameras and united community front had apparently given them pause. "Still watching," Frank observed grimly, noting the SUV. MAI doesn't give up easily. Let them watch, Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. We're not doing anything wrong. Actually, Bill said with a slow smile, we might be doing something very right. Something that threatens their model. If small farms can band together to access premium markets while maintaining independence, well, that challenges the whole corporate consolidation approach. The idea that her small farm could represent a meaningful alternative to industrial agriculture was both thrilling and sobering. May and similar corporations had spent decades absorbing family farms into massive operations, arguing that economies of scale were the only viable path forward. Sarah's approach, intensive, sustainable production focused on quality rather than quantity, directly contradicted that narrative. All the more reason to make it work, Harold concluded. Show there's another way forward besides selling out to corporations or going broke trying to compete with them on commodity crops. As the men departed, each promising to reach out to potential partner farms, Sarah felt a mix of hope and trepidation. The opportunity was enormous, but so were the challenges and responsibilities. She was no longer just trying to make her own farm succeed. She was potentially becoming the linchpin for a new collaborative model in Ridgeway Valley. Emma found her, still sitting at the kitchen table an hour later, surrounded by notes and calculations. "Is everything okay, Mom?" she asked, helping herself to a glass of lemonade from the refrigerator. "Just thinking about some big decisions," Sarah replied with a smile. "How would you feel about working with other farms to grow more vegetables? And for the restaurants?" Emma's face lit up. "Like a team, that would be amazing." Her enthusiasm quickly gave way to practical questions, exactly the response Sarah had come to expect from her thoughtful daughter. Would they use our methods? Would we still be in charge of our part? Could I still do the record-keeping? Sarah laughed. Yes to all of that. In fact, you might need to teach other farms how to keep records as good as yours. The idea clearly appealed to Emma's organizational nature. I could create a standardized system, she mused, maybe even a computer database. Watching her daughter's mind work, Sarah felt a surge of pride. Emma had blossomed here in ways that would never have been possible in their city apartment. The shy, bookish girl who had arrived in Ridgeway Valley just months ago had transformed into a confident young farmer with practical skills and growing expertise. Josh burst into the kitchen then, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Frank says the sweet corn will be ready in 3 weeks, and he's going to teach me how to tell when it's perfect for picking." The simple joy in everyday farm tasks had similarly transformed her son. In the city, Josh had struggled with focus, his energy often leaving him restless and frustrated in the confines of their small apartment and structured classroom. Here, with meaningful work that engaged his hands as well as his mind, he had found purpose and pride. The next morning brought a surprise visitor, Diane Collins, from the local diner. She arrived just after breakfast, her practical sedan pulling into the driveway as Sarah was heading out to the fields. "Morning, Sarah," Diane called, stepping out with a large box balanced on her hip. "Got a minute?" Sarah had always found Diane difficult to read. The diner owner hadn't been openly hostile like some, but neither had she been particularly welcoming. She was a respected figure in the community. Her diner served as the unofficial headquarters for local news and opinion, but she had kept her distance from the Mitchell farm. "Of course," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the porch. "Can I get you some coffee?" "No need," Diane said, setting the box on the porch railing. "Just wanted to drop this by. Heard about your restaurant contracts from Bill. Thought these might be useful." Sarah opened the box to find dozens of plastic containers, the kind restaurants used for produce deliveries. "These are perfect for the deliveries," she exclaimed. "Where did you get them?" "Been saving them for years," Diane explained with a shrug. Restaurants deliver my supplies in them, and I could never bring myself to throw out perfectly good containers. They've been collecting dust in my storeroom. Figured you could put them to better use." The practical gift was typical of the community's approach, not sentimental but useful and thoughtful. "Thank you, Diane. These will save me a significant expense." Diane nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with gratitude. "Also," she continued more hesitantly, "been thinking about that cooperative idea Bill mentioned. My brother-in-law's got a small orchard that's been struggling to find buyers. Top-quality fruit, but the big distributors aren't interested in his volume. Might be a good addition to your restaurant offerings." Sarah hadn't expected this. "I'd love to talk with him. Diversifying what we can offer the restaurants would strengthen everyone's position." "I'll send him your way," Diane promised. She turned to go, then paused. "You know, when you first showed up at that festival, I gave you 3 months tops. Figured you'd break under the first real pressure." Her expression softened slightly. "Glad to be wrong about that. This valley needs some new ideas, much as we old-timers hate to admit it." Coming from Diane, a third-generation Ridgeway resident who served as the community's unofficial gatekeeper, this was high praise indeed. "We couldn't have made it without all of you," Sarah replied honestly, "especially after the incident with the chickens." Diane's face hardened. May crossed a line there. "We take care of our own in this valley, even the stubborn ones with city accents and fancy farming ideas." A smile softened her words. "Anyway, I hear your eggs are the best around now. Might be interested in some for the diner if you've got extra." By the time Diane left, 3 more neighbors had arrived. Ryan Thompson with detailed questions about vegetable production, Maria Rodriguez to discuss potential partnership, and Walter Simmons with transplants for fall crops. The Mitchell farm, once isolated by skepticism and misunderstanding, had become a hub of community activity. That evening, as Sarah walked her fields in the golden light of sunset, she marveled at how completely her position had shifted in just a few months. The outsider had become an integral part of the community fabric. The novice farmer was now coordinating a budding cooperative of established producers. The struggling single mother had created not just a livelihood, but a model that others wanted to emulate. The crops stretched around her in neat, thriving rows, tangible proof of her vision and perseverance. Frank's predictions of catastrophe hadn't materialized. The soil was responding to her careful management, the careful crop rotation and cover planting already showing results in improved structure and fertility. The financial projections, once so tenuous, now showed a clear path to sustainability with the restaurant contracts and potential cooperative structure. Yet challenges remained. May continued to expand their presence in the region, and Sarah had no illusions that they had given up on acquiring her water rights. The upcoming harvest season would test her management skills and physical endurance in ways she couldn't fully anticipate. Emma joined her mother in the field, clipboard in hand for the morning crop check. "Did we win?" she asked, having watched the gathering from a distance. Sarah put an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "This round, yes, but the real victory will be at harvest time, when all this work finally pays off." Emma nodded seriously. "The first tomatoes are starting to turn color, and the kale is almost ready for a second cutting. Chef Laurent will be pleased." Looking at the flourishing fields around them, Sarah could hardly believe how far they had come from those first difficult days when even the simplest tasks had seemed overwhelming. The soil that had been depleted and neglected was now rich with growing life. The community that had been closed and skeptical now stood firmly beside them, and her children, who had arrived as city kids knowing nothing of farming, now moved through the fields with confidence and purpose. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "harvest time will show everyone what we can do." What no one yet realized was how dramatically that harvest would unfold, or how completely it would transform not just Mitchell Farm, but the future of farming in Ridgeway Valley. The morning mist hung low over Ridgeway Valley as Sarah stood at the edge of her property, watching the sun rise on Harvest Festival Day. Behind her, the farm buzzed with activity. Jake Miller and local workers loading produce onto trucks, Emma efficiently managing the packing station, and Josh darting between tasks, helping with egg cartons bearing the new Mitchell Farm logo. What had once been the neglected Pearson place now showcased neat rows of vegetables, a refurbished red barn serving as the Ridgeway Valley Growers Cooperative Hub, and a freshly painted farmhouse with Emma's pollinator gardens. But the most profound transformation lay in the web of relationships now connecting the Mitchell farm to the community. The cooperative that began as a tentative idea around Sarah's kitchen table had grown to include 7 farms, supplying 5 Madison restaurants, 3 local markets, and Diane's diner. Frank's truck pulled up beside her, window rolled down, his weathered face split by an uncharacteristic smile. "Big day," he said simply. Sarah nodded, momentarily too emotional for words. "Couldn't have done it without you," she finally managed. Frank waved away her gratitude with characteristic gruffness. "You'd have figured it out, stubborn as you are." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged with a smile, "but it would have been a much lonelier road." At the festival grounds, the Mitchell Farm table stood in a prime location, thanks to Harold Weber's influence. Martha Donovan directed the arrangement with military precision. Emma created professional-looking signs describing their growing methods, and Josh proudly manned a booth offering samples of their heirloom tomatoes. "There you are," Martha called, when she spotted Sarah. "Come see what we've done. Those MAI people won't know what hit them." Across the green, MAI had established a significant presence with glossy banners proclaiming their commitment to modern agricultural excellence and community partnership. Robert Carlson stood at the entrance, greeting visitors with promotional materials. "They're still trying to win hearts and minds," Frank observed quietly. "Been offering significantly above market prices all week." Sarah felt a pang of regret for the continuing consolidation, but her focus today was on celebration. Mitchell Farm had not only survived its first growing season against all predictions, it had thrived. The festival officially opened at 10 o'clock with a speech from Harold C. Weber celebrating the valley's agricultural heritage. The Mitchell Farm display drew constant attention throughout the morning, visitors marveling at the vibrant colors of their heirloom varieties. Restaurant chefs engaging Emma in technical conversations about soil biology, and Josh charming everyone with his enthusiastic explanations of each tomato variety. Around noon, Robert Carlson arrived with several other MAI executives. He paused at the Mitchell Farm table, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. "Impressive display, Ms. Mitchell. Your first harvest season seems to have been quite successful." "Thank you, Mr. Carlson," Sarah replied evenly. "I understand your cooperative has secured several significant contracts," he continued, examining a perfect heirloom eggplant with feigned interest. "An innovative approach." "Innovation often comes from necessity," Sarah responded. "Small farms need to find new models to remain viable in a landscape increasingly dominated by corporate interests." Carlson introduced Preston Hargrove, MAI's regional director, a distinguished-looking man who'd been observing their exchange. "Ms. Mitchell, your reputation precedes you," Hargrove said, extending his hand. "Does it?" Sarah asked, shaking it firmly. "Indeed, not many small-scale operations withstand MAI's acquisition offers. Fewer still inspire other farms to follow their example. Perhaps that says more about your acquisition tactics than it does about me," Sarah suggested mildly. Hargrove laughed, the sound genuine despite the tension. "Touché. I've reviewed your water management approaches and cooperative distribution model with great interest. Mr. Hargrove oversees MAI's sustainability initiatives, Carlson explained, and finding them wanting in many cases, Hargrove added candidly. The corporate agricultural model has strengths, but sustainability isn't consistently among them. Unlike Carlson's rehearsed polish, Hargrove seemed to possess genuine engagement with agricultural issues. We're exploring partnership models, bridging industrial efficiency and sustainable practices, Hargrove continued. Your cooperative approach has caught our attention. Rather than competing against it, we're considering ways to support it. Support it? Frank interjected skeptically. After months of trying to undermine it? Hargrove acknowledged Frank's skepticism. Corporate strategies evolve in response to changing conditions. Climate realities are forcing companies like MAI to reconsider our assumptions. The industrial model that prioritizes short-term yield over long-term soil health is showing limitations. Your approach demonstrates remarkable resilience. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah asked. A potential partnership. MAI would provide capital investment to scale up your cooperative model, while your group maintains operational control and sustainable practices. We'd learn from your methods. You'd benefit from our distribution networks and resources. The unexpected proposal left Sarah momentarily speechless. Bill Thompson joined them, his furrowed brow reflecting natural suspicion. Sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? Healthy skepticism is warranted, Hargrove acknowledged. I'm not suggesting an immediate agreement. Rather, I'd like representatives from your cooperative to visit our headquarters, tour our research facilities, and begin a dialogue about potential collaboration. He handed Sarah his business card. Corporate agriculture isn't going away, Ms. Mitchell, but how it operates can evolve. Your work represents an alternative worth exploring, not eliminating. After the MAI representatives departed, Frank scratched his chin thoughtfully. Corporations change direction when profit demands it. If sustainable methods are becoming more economically viable due to climate pressures, they might genuinely be reconsidering their approach. Or it could be a more sophisticated tactic, Bill cautioned. Get us to lower our guard, then change the terms once we're invested. Sarah tucked Hargrove's card into her pocket. Either way, it represents leverage we didn't have before. And recognition of what we've built here. The festival announcer called everyone to the awards ceremony. Josh ran up, excitement radiating from every pore. Mom, do you think our tomatoes have a chance? The crowd gathered as Mayor Jenkins began announcing winners. When he reached Best Heirloom Vegetable Variety, he called out Mitchell Farm for their remarkable collection of heirloom tomatoes. A cheer went up as Josh raced to accept the blue ribbon. When someone called for a speech, the mayor whispered encouragement in Josh's ear. Thank you very much, Josh said into the microphone, his voice small but clear. Our tomatoes are special because we grow them with love, and because Frank helped us figure out exactly when to pick them, and because Emma makes sure they get exactly the right amount of water. He paused, then added with perfect childish honesty, and because Mom wouldn't let us give up even when it was really, really hard. The simple words brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The crowd erupted in approving applause as Josh ran back, ribbon clutched tightly in his small hand. We did it, Mom, he exclaimed. We're real farmers now. As evening approached, the Mitchell family joined others for the traditional harvest dinner on the green. Sarah found herself seated between Frank and Martha, watching Emma confidently converse with other farm children, while Josh proudly displayed his blue ribbon. Never thought I'd see the day, Bill Thompson remarked from across the table. City kids turned proper farm young'uns in less than a year. They've taken to it more naturally than I could have imagined, Sarah agreed. And you? Martha asked perceptively. Was it what you expected when you drove up to that old Peterson place back in March? Sarah considered the question, looking around, at the community that had become her home. Harder in some ways, easier in others. I expected the physical challenges. What I didn't expect was how it would change us all. How it would heal something I didn't even realize was broken.